Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the Drum Odyssey. This is like a follow-on from last week where we looked at decoupling floor toms. This week, I'm going to dive in to look at some other drums, a little refresher. With the Drummers World, the thing that I noticed, what I had assumed going into this, was that it is enhancing the fundamental. And through all of these tests of decoupling, what I've discovered is that it's enhancing the first resonance. So in that Drummers World 15 by 12, the initial fundamental was at 77 Hertz. What it is enhancing, 154 Hertz. This is a Ludwig, beautiful white marine pearl, beautiful Keystone badge, which puts it as being 60s, I think. Evans 360 on top and Ludwig Weathermaster on bottom. Great sounding drums. Let's have a listen. Comparison between the Ludwig and the Drummers World, almost identical tuning, same fundamental, but an awful lot less sustain in the Ludwig, this is why I started using these techniques, and maybe some of these techniques aren't really intended for modern drums. We can see that the Drummers World has a much more increased sustain, and that might be to do with the bearing edges. So maybe all those people who said get your bearing edges done, maybe they're right. I don't want to prove people right on the internet, especially when they're shouting. So we'll just go back to thinking about decoupling, shall we? Right, let's have a look at the Ludwig. Okay, so we've got a fundamental that is happening at 77 Hertz. It's got a relatively short sustain of 1664 milliseconds. We'll notice that the kind of high end tails off pretty quickly on these drums. Ludwig are known for being kind of thuddy, so this is no real surprise. My decoupling pads and got them under. When I add the washing machine ISO pucks, what we get is, as I've said before, what's expected is an increased mid-range presence. So I think for years I kind of assumed that this was giving me more low end, but I think what that actually is a bit of an illusion, in that there's more mid-range being added and I'm perceiving that as low frequency sustain. We can see that both the drum as sort of natural just on the ground and with the ISO pucks, it's largely the same. In fact, as we've seen in the other experiments with the Drummers World, I am getting that like little bit of attenuation happening around the 2 to 2.5k mark. But yeah, the frequency response is pretty much unchanged. We do get an increased sustain on this Ludwig, and it's not as crazy as the Drummers World, if we remember from last week. With the washing machine ISO pucks, I got an increased sustain of 152%. We're not seeing that kind of increase, but we are seeing an increase of 17.9%, going from 1664 milliseconds to 1963, giving us a difference of 299 milliseconds. Okay, so sticking with 16 by 16, I'm going to move on to a Gretsch. In shooting this, I got the results that I was sort of expecting. I don't think this is a confirmation bias, but more a confirmation, with the exception of one drum, which was the Gretsch. I love 70s Gretsch drums. I think they're amazing. I think the 70s and the 80s Gretsch drums are pretty much my favourite drums ever made. But annoyingly, I buggered up this test. Basically, I just kept talking over the sustain of the drum. I don't know why I did this. So I've largely screwed this up as a test. So just take this with a grain of salt. I'm going to have to go back and test this some more. I feel really stupid that I've done this, but I did. I ruined it. In comparison with the Ludwig, it's again pretty much centered around the same fundamental. I tried to tune them pretty much so they were sitting in the same place. We'll see right off the bat that the Gretsch, without me doing anything, has a longer sustain time than the Ludwig. Those who've played either of those drums would sort of expect that we're getting more low frequency, that we're getting more mid-range. We are seeing a sort of sharper attenuation in that low frequency fundamental. It rings out for longer. Yeah, that could be die-cast hoops. Yeah, so we're seeing a bit more of a sharper curve here. One of the things that is interesting is what happens to the frequencies, to the waterfall. We notice with the Gretsch, we get an increase of the fundamental, not just of the second order harmonic happening, which I thought was really interesting. I don't see that same thing happening in the other drums. Like if we look back at the Ludwig, there isn't really a huge amount of change. There's a little bit more happening in this mid-range bit, which we'd expect from the test we did with the drums were, but with the Gretsch, it's way more pronounced. So yeah, I'm gonna have to do more tests with die-cast hoops. But yeah, you can see there's a way more sustain happening. The final drum I did is not a 16-inch floor tom, it is an 18 diameter by 16 deep Ludwig Stainless Steel. Interestingly, in the Ludwig 1976 catalogue, a stinging dry sound of stainless steel shatters the air for the first time. That to me suggests more attack. Really interestingly, yeah, they weren't lying. We get this really sort of aggressive amplitude in the fundamental, then it quickly dissipates. It sort of rings on pretty evenly. If we look at that in comparison with the 16 Ludwig, which I know, not really a fair sort of comparison, completely different drums, completely different heads, but you'll see that the sort of natural decay of a wood drum is very different to that of a metal drum. You see that fundamental just drops off, and a real strong fundamental and not much happening in the mid. So it's almost, you can see here, it's almost like a mid-range scoop that's happening on that drum, which I think is really interesting. Now if I add the isolated drum, what do we get? We get some of that mid-range back, which is what we expect kind of to happen from our experiments thus far. This drum is kind of around the 30 Hertz point as a fundamental. It's absolutely amazing. What an amazing drum. And we get that growl coming back in, 70, 80 Hertz. Super cool. We can see, as we've come to expect with decoupling the drum, we're getting, again, slightly more attenuation happening in the high frequency. I tend to prefer stuff to be a bit dull, so that might be why I've got this proclivity towards decoupling the floor tom. I don't know. But yeah, again, like the difference in the sustain of this is enormous. So on this stainless steel floor tom, its initial sustain was 2094, so just a touch over 2 seconds. With the washing machine ISO pucks, we got 3614, resulting in a difference of 1520, so giving us an increase of sustain of 72.58%. So I would say over the floor toms, there's definitely something happening here. It is definitely doing something, but what that difference is, I think it's opened up more questions. I need to go back and experiment with the die-cast hoops further. I want to do more experiments with Gretsch. As I say, I sort of buggered that up in the moment. I regret it, but you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing when you can look back and go, oh God, why did I do that? I'm still working out the method for all of this sort of thing, which I think I've sort of honed in on a little bit more and figured out. Please consider liking and subscribing or sharing. It really helps. I'd love to do more of these. I find drums so fascinating. Thanks very much. I have a whole bunch of drum samples and instruments and things available at majetone.com. If you like this, you probably like those. Cheers. Bye.